Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is a man that needs no introduction, but I'm going to give him one anyway. Mr. Steven Pressfield. He's the author of many books, a lot of books, both nonfiction and fiction. His debut novel, The Legend of Bagger Vance, was adopted for screen, so turned into a film of the same title, released in 2000, directed by Robert Redford with Matt Damon and Will Smith. He's written a bunch of books you've probably heard of, including his books around his struggles to earn a living as a writer. It took him 17 years to get to his first paycheck, which we'll talk about. And he's detailed that in the War of Art, Turning Pro, The Authentic Swing, Nobody Wants to Read Your Beep, and The Knowledge. So just a prolific writer. His book, The War of Art, was crazy impactful for me as I was getting started on my journey for book writing and all that good stuff. So today, what we're going to be talking about is The War of Art, turning pro as a writer and as an author. What's the difference between fiction and nonfiction writing as he sees it, and a whole lot more. Steven, great to have you.
All right. It's great to be here, Chandler. Thanks for having me.
So why did you decide to become a writer, and why books? I mean, they've obviously become such a huge part of your life, but what was the impetus behind the start?
When I was, maybe 22 or 23, I worked as a junior copywriter at a big ad agency in New York. And I had a boss named Ed Hannibal. And he wrote a novel out of the blue, and it became an instant hit. And he became, like, overnight a famous guy. And he quit, and he was a full-time writer. And so I thought, well, why the hell don't I do that? It looks pretty easy. So I quit too. And, I always say I too became an overnight success. It just took me 30 years after that. But seriously, in all seriousness, I wasn't one of those kids that grew up like writing short stories for English class or anything like that. It never even occurred to me to write anything until I was, a copywriter. And then I saw all of these other people, playwrights and stuff that were getting things done. And I just thought, wow, this seems pretty cool.
Yeah.
So that was my impetus for it.
Yeah. And so do you think like, are there skill sets that you feel like you learned being a copywriter at an ad agency that have translated to not only writing better books, but writing book descriptions and like writing things that actually lead to selling more books?
Yes, definitely. Although not, I was never a very good advertising writer, but one thing that they really teach you in advertising, like a TV commercial, if it's 30 seconds long, can't have more than 60 words of copy, right? Or dialogue or whatever it is. So, and I found, like any other young copywriter, that I would write these things that would have like 190 words, and I'd have to like bring it into my boss, and he'd say, cut it in half. And he'd send me back, it'd take me all day. I'd bring it back, and he'd say, cut this in half, and doing that sort of over and over and over. One thing, if you read The War of Art or Turning Pro or any of those books of mine about writing, you'll see that there are no wasted words in there. It's all very lean. And that definitely came out of that experience of just how little, how short can you make it and still communicate the idea? Yeah.
I mean, it's the classic, I don't know if it's misattributed or not, but Abe Lincoln quote of, if I would have had longer, I would have written a shorter letter.
Yeah.
It's the, Jerry Seinfeld, who said, hey, I'll spend an hour cutting one word out of a joke.
I never heard that. That's great. I believe that completely. Yeah.
Yeah. So obviously you've now written in multiple genres. And if my research is correct, I believe that you wrote fiction first, then nonfiction,
Yes.
So what would be your advice for multi-genre authors on which genre they should start with first? If someone's like, hey, I've got a nonfiction idea and a fiction idea, which one should I write first?
I really think it varies with who the person is and what their natural strength is.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah, I couldn't say one or the other. For me, I was just I just always wanted to tell stories rather than write essays or do biographies or anything like that. So fiction worked for me, but I would say to anybody thinking about that, whatever your heart tells you is the way to go.
Mm-hmm. And how did you? I mean, was it just the desire to tell stories, or how did you land on fiction first? Because it seems like you had a background in screenplays, and so or you worked on screenplays at the start, and then first fiction book, then movie. Is that kind of the timeline?
Not exactly, but close.
Okay.
Like first, you know, like my boss in advertising that wrote a novel.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, well, I want to write a novel too. You know, that seemed like the cool thing to do. So that's how I started. And I wrote over a period of, I don't know, maybe 12 or 15 years. I wrote like 3 novels that never got published. You know, they were just the kind that you should stick in a drawer, you know? So, and finally, I just kind of gave up on that. I just said, I'm never going to be able to do that. And I went out to Hollywood from New York and tried to, you know, to become a screenwriter. And I had like a kind of a B or C level career for about 10 years as a screenwriter. But that really sort of got me very much into storytelling, you know, and what is a story and what is act 1, act 2, all the stuff that you learn.
Yeah.
And then finally, I had the idea for The Legend of Bagger Vance as a novel. Mm-hmm. And finally, I was able to do that. And that sort of, you know, broke through for me in that sense.
What did you learn in your time as a screenwriter that you feel like made you a better writer?
I mean, I could talk about this for years, you know, for hours.
Yeah.
You know, there is a sort of a model of what a screenplay is, you know, and if you put almost any movie up against this model, have you ever read anything by Blake Snyder, Save the Cat? Does that ring a bell at all?
I haven't, no.
He's like a kind of a screenwriting teacher and a screenwriter. He died, unfortunately, at a young age. But he's a great guy that breaks out this kind of model. Like a screenplay is always in 3 acts. You know, the first act is like maybe 27 pages. Its middle is maybe 54 pages. Act 3 is another 20-something pages. And there are definite beats that go along the way. An inciting incident, a crossing of the threshold, act 2 midpoint, you know, an all is lost moment, bump it a bump it a bump, right? And whether you put up Casablanca or, The Wizard of Oz or Star Wars, they all kind of follow a real similar sort of template. And as you work in the business, you learn that, you know, it just gets beaten into your head, you know? And so that model I have found also works for novels. I mean, you can also do it many, many other ways as well. But so you do sort of learn what a story is. The idea of the hero's journey, that whole concept, you know, that, going from A to Z. And so that's kind of, it's like the University of Hard Knocks in the movie business.
And so so it sounds like a big takeaway is over, 5-part story structure and like overall story structure and, slap, inciting incident, kind of all that stuff.
Yeah.
What were some other, what were maybe some more nuanced things that you feel like you learned? I would imagine you're condensed to an hour and a half or 2 hours. So did that, and it's, dialogue, I guess, or, you're writing for a movie versus writing for a book. Was there any other kind of like nuance?
Oh, yeah. I know you
talk about this for days.
There's so much.
Yeah.
But one thing, of course, is in a movie or screenplay, let's say, you really can't go inside a character's head. You can't do an interior monologue unless you do it in like a voiceover, which is always really lame, So you have to rely on, or you learn to rely on that the only way you can kind of communicate what the character is feeling is by visual, what's in their face, what's in their, what they act, and whatever dialogue they say. And that's a great discipline. So it really forces you to tell a story in the leanest way possible. And the other thing, I mean, like I said, I could talk about this forever, but there's a concept in dialogue writing for movies called on the nose. Have you heard that one, Chandler?
Mm-mm.
Like writing on the nose is a big no-no. You're never supposed to. And what that means is when an actor or a character says in their dialogue out loud what they're thinking. In other words, it's text instead of subtext. And it's always much better, particularly if the character is saying the opposite of what they're thinking. Like one character is across from another and has a gun in his pocket and is intending to kill that other person, right? Mm-hmm. But what the character may talk about is how much they love them, how interesting they are, the great friendship that they have. And the reason you want to write like that in movies is because the audience watching that sees the body language, sees the look in the eye and says, oh, wait a minute, this guy's going to kill this other character, And that's more fun than if the character went in and said, I'm going to blow your brains out, you SOB. So that's a whole other way that you learn to write dialogue for movies. It should never be on the nose. It should always be subtext instead of text.
And so are you saying that that's frowned upon in movies, but you would do that differently in books, or you would do it the same way?
It is a little different in books. It's harder in books because you can't see the character's face. You can't see the character's body language, right? So it is harder, but anytime you can do it. I mean, I'll just give you one small example. There's, if you remember the movie Fight Club, with Brad Pitt and I'm blanking on the other guy's name, Edward Norton. Edward Norton, throughout the course of the movie, has a sort of an on-again love thing going with, I'm blanking on her name too, but there's a scene at the end of the movie where he puts her on a bus to save her, and she looks back at him across the bus and says to him, "You're the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my life." And what she really means by that is, I love you. And so that is a case of subtext instead of text. And it's really powerful because he's saving her life, putting her on the bus like Humphrey Bogart, putting Ingrid Bergman on the plane to Lisbon in Casablanca. And so that's great screenwriting.
Yeah, that's interesting nuance. So as someone who's now written, you've
Helena Bonham Carter. That's her name.
Yeah. Nice. As someone who's now written fiction and nonfiction, obviously been very, very prolific in both. How do you approach those writing each type of book differently? Like, how is your approach to writing great nonfiction different from your approach to writing great fiction?
Of course, nonfiction covers a real wide range of stuff, right? It could be a biography of Harry Truman. That would be nonfiction, or it could be a self-help book, or it could be something like The Tipping Point or Outliers, a Malcolm Gladwell type of book that would be like a big think piece, or, so it's quite a lot of different stuff. And the big issue, I think, there's a lot of issues, but one big issue is what is the narrative voice in both cases? Like in To Kill a Mockingbird, let's say, a novel, fiction. The narrative voice is the story is told by the young girl Scout, the daughter, Atticus Finch's daughter, Scout. And it's told not as a little girl, but in memory, as a grown woman, in memory, describing what happened one summer when she was, 8 or 9 years old. And so once you, the writer, have settled on that narrative voice, then everything kind of falls into place, right? Scout has a voice. She feels a certain way about her brother, Jim, about her dad, Atticus, et cetera, et cetera. Now, on the other hand, if you're Malcolm Gladwell and you're writing Outliers or something like that, you kind of have to ask yourself, well, what voice do I want to use? Do I want to be like an authoritative, all-knowing, wise person who's going to spell something out to you? Or do I want to be kind of your friend? that's kind of telling you, gee, I got interested in this idea about the tipping point, and I happen to be in Baltimore, and I was talking to a lady about that sort of stuff, right? So finding that narrative voice, who's telling the story, and what tone of voice are you going to use to the reader? For instance, in my book, The War of Art, I sort of speak in my own voice. So it's Steve Pressfield addressing you, the reader. But it's not really me. It's not like if you and I were hanging out in a bar, I was whatever I was. I have sort of adopted a certain kind of voice. And that took a lot of thought, to figure out, am I going to be buddy with the reader, or am I going to be a little bit of a drill sergeant and kind of kick the reader in the ass a little bit,
Yeah.
Or am I going to be self-revealing and tell stories about my own failures? And that, which is a lot of that is in The War of Art.
Yeah.
So each one, I think, the fiction or nonfiction, a lot of it is about finding that tone of voice, that narrative medium.
And so let's break that down a little bit, one genre at a time. So with your nonfiction books, how do you decide on the voice? And is that voice consistent across all books? Or are you saying, okay, this is the tone that I feel like I need to be in for this specific message in this specific book?
That's a great question. Great. I think it's different with each book. Depending on the book, the book will determine what it is. If you were writing a biography of the Dalai Lama, you probably wouldn't use a joking tone of voice, right? It would probably be a respectful tone of voice, right? On the other hand, if you were writing, Bill Murray's life story, it might be a kind of a zany thing. You might even come up with, you might not even have chapters. You might have like little snippets, right?
Yeah.
So the sort of the tone of voice sort of arises from the material.
Yeah. And would you say that's the same on the fiction side of things? Like, do you
definitely?
Okay, got it.
Definitely.
How do you decide there?
Well, let's see. Let's say Catcher in the Rye. It's a book we're all kind of familiar with. It's told by the narrator Holden Caulfield in the first person, and it starts. I remember the beginning goes something like this. If you really want to know about it, you probably want to hear about my lousy life and how I was raised by my parents, and it was really terrible. But, I'm tired of that stuff. So let me just tell you the truth, right? So that's a real kind of offhand, really, it really brings the reader in right away, and that it's not going to be some formal high tone thing, but that's very much a crafted voice. Very much a decision on J.D. Salinger's part to write it that way. He probably doesn't talk that way, And if you go to, any book will have a different. If you read like all of Philip Roth's books, although they're very similar, he'll have a different tone of voice in each one, depending on, and that takes a lot of thought. Who tells the story? Is it the all-seeing author? Is it one character? Is it a different character? But it seems to me, from my experience, if you get that right at the start, everything is easy. If you get it wrong, you're torturing yourself.
That's got to be the $1 million question. Have you ever gotten into a book and been part of the way through and said, oh man, I just chose wrong and now I've got to go backtrack and redo this?
Exactly. Yes. But usually it's very clear. It's not like you get in 90 pages in. It's like you get in there 2 pages and this is not working at all.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay. So I want to touch on this piece because, it took you 17 years to earn a paycheck from your writing. And I think, it's probably, gosh, this is good. I feel like this is going to relate to so many people where you see someone close to you become an overnight success. And then it's like, for me, it was dropping out of school and pursuing my company. And it sounds like for you, it was like, all right, I quit my job and I'm going to do this. And then 17 years, what did you learn from that? And how did you last? I mean, I feel like so many people would just give up. So how'd you last, and what did you learn from that would be helpful for other authors that are kind of on that journey?
Well, that's another great question. And what I definitely learned was when you struggle for so long with no financial reward, no anything, you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? You know, am I crazy? Is there something wrong? I'm serious now. Is there something wrong with me? Am I demented? Am I just self-destructive? And I just sort of came to the conclusion that this is who I am. I'm a writer, and I'm going to keep doing this, and I don't care. If it takes me forever, if I never break through, I'm going to keep doing it. That was a really big breakthrough, in the sense of, okay, I'm just going to, like Elizabeth Gilbert says, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, and other books. She said at the start of her career, she kind of made a deal with her writing. And she said, I will never ask you to support me. I will always support you. If I have to work as a waitress, I'll work as a waitress to do my writing. And I think that was a great thing on her part, Now, the second part of your question, Chandler, was like, how did I keep going?
Yeah.
And the answer is that many times I tried to not keep going. I tried, I went back to work in advertising. I worked in other kind of jobs, and I really tried. I said, let me just try to succeed, but I couldn't. I was just so depressed at the end of a day that I would have to go home and try to write something. That's one part of that period. But the other part of it is like when I started working as a screenwriter, and it wasn't what I really wanted to do, but I was learning. I was working in my chosen field. I was getting a paycheck, and I was learning so that kept me going. I felt, you feel like, the next one's going to be the one,
Yeah.
So those various things kind of kept me going.
Yeah. That's that. And so getting closer to what you want to do, and maybe it's not all the way there, but it's like maybe for aspiring author, it might be a similar thing. Could be freelancing. Like I'm freelance writing for someone else, and it's not exactly what I want to do, but it's helping me get better at my craft, and I'm getting a paycheck, which helps me feel like a little bit more momentum.
Yes. And another thing that I did in that period, for a while, I had a little freelance advertising business, just me, a one-man thing. And what I was doing, what I was writing, wasn't helping me at all. But I felt like I can support myself. I can, in an entrepreneurial way. It was a real low-level thing. I was just like making barely enough to pay my rent. But at least I felt like, I'm learning to be an entrepreneur. I'm learning not to rely on a paycheck from a company. I'm learning to, and I learned, one of the things I learned in that period was that you don't even have to be good. All you have to do is be reliable. All you have to do, seriously, because your competition are so flaky and so unreliable that if you just show up, even if you're producing mediocre work, people love you. They're so happy to see you that you're there, to actually do a job and deliver it on time. So that reinforces you in being a professional. And then when you start actually writing movies or writing books, you deliver on time.
Yeah.
And that helps a lot.
Yeah. What would be your advice for folks, that from that 17-year period, knowing what you know now, on how to condense that time period?
I don't know if you can condense it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think things happen in their own time, through a lot of that period, I wasn't writing at all. I was doing other stuff, but I would say realistically, before I was able to produce something that was publishable was probably about 20 years. And the stuff that I did, some of it wasn't bad, but it wasn't at the level of being publishable. And I myself wouldn't have published it if I was a publisher. So for me, it took a long time to kind of just get to the point where I could actually write something that was worthwhile. And It isn't easy. Why does what people think? Everybody thinks they can write, just like I did at the start when my boss wrote this novel. I thought, oh shit, I'll write a novel, and I was an idiot, and anybody that watched me would have said, "What do you think? You don't know nothing,"
Yeah. So you feel like there's no way to condense the process?
I mean, I think for some people it happens right away, right? God bless them, they're lucky. A lot of people. I look at Bob Dylan or Neil Young or Joni Mitchell, when they were like 18 years old, they were having gigantic hits. God bless them that they got lucky. For me, I was like 54 years old before I sold a novel. So some of us takes a little longer.
Hey, well, good news for anyone listening. It's not too late.
It's not too late.
Yeah. If you think you missed it. Hey, let's talk about, this is a through line and I mean, in your book, the War of Art, and you talk about resistance and it's just, I just remember listening to the audiobook and it was like resistance. For those who are unfamiliar with the concept, what is it and how can writers fight through resistance to get their first book written?
Well, one of the earliest sentences in The War of Art goes something like this. It said, there's a secret that real writers know that wannabe writers don't know. And the secret is this: it's not the writing part that's hard. What's hard is sitting down to write. And what stops us from sitting down is what I call resistance with a capital R. And resistance is that force. Like if you sit down before one of these things and there's a blank screen in front of you, you can feel radiating off that screen into your face a negative force, right? That is trying to get you to go have a hot fudge sundae or head for the beach or take a nap or do anything but actually do your work, right? And that force is what I call resistance. It's the force of self-sabotage, of self-doubt, of fear, of everything that will stop you from doing your thing. And that's why there are millions and millions of people who want to be writers, but very, very few that actually are writers or anything, songwriters, musicians, whatever. And that force of self-sabotage and of self-undermining, self-doubt is the primary devil. It's really not that hard to write. You can learn how to write, but to overcome your own resistance, your own internal force of self-sabotage, that takes guts. And the other thing is that, at least for me, I never even knew that there was such a thing as resistance. I thought that voice in my head was real. The voice telling me, you're a loser, you're a bum, how dare you think that you can write this thing? It's all been done before, your stuff sucks, that kind of thing. And finally, one day, I just sort of said, that's not me, that's not my voice, that's this negative force that's out there. And that gave me the ability to sort of dismiss it. When I'd hear that voice, I would just say, get out of here, I'm still going to do my work. I don't believe that voice. I don't accept it. I dismiss it. But that's the real challenge. That's really what kind of separates the professionals from the amateurs, from people who are going to succeed, from people that are going to fail, is knowing that that there is this force called resistance, and that you, the writer or the would-be artist, have to marshal all your resources, all your guts, all your courage, all your perseverance, all your self-belief to overcome that force. But once you do that, then you're in the game.
And so I love the externalizing it as this identity that is not me. It's this external thing, which makes it easier to dismiss it. Any other thoughts for writers on? I know obviously you talk about this in the book, but practical ways to kind of shed resistance specifically in the book writing process.
I mean, each person, I think, will come up with their own way of doing it. Some like to tackle it head on, like I do. That works for me. Others kind of do a little sort of a jujitsu thing, where they kind of will give it a name and they'll tell it to go in the corner, or something like that. But I think the main thing is to take it seriously and to treat it with respect. It's a real enemy. It's the demon, it's a devil, and finding a way to do it. I mean, one of the things that my follow-up book to The War of Art, as you know, is a book called Turning Pro. Mm-hmm. And that sort of was my way of getting around resistance, of thinking of myself not as an amateur writer, not a wannabe writer, but as a professional, because a professional has a whole different attitude than an amateur. An amateur, when he or she hits adversity, an amateur folds. An amateur will write or will do a creative thing depending on their mood. It's like they wake, oh, do I feel like it? Well, maybe I don't really feel like it today. But a pro doesn't care what they feel like. Yeah. They're going to sit down and do their work. And a pro sort of learns that sometimes the days when you least feel like it are the best days. Woo! You get the best work. So, and other things that a pro shows up every day. Mm-hmm. Right? I always think of like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, or Tom Brady, somebody like that. I don't care what they feel like in the morning. They show up, right? And the pro stays on the job all day. A pro is in it for real. They're not dabbling. They're not screwing around. They're not doing it superficially. They're committed, and a pro plays hurt. This is another big part of the thing. If you think about Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or any great athlete, they all know that you're never 100% when you get on the floor, right? Your ankle is tweaked, your elbow doesn't work, your finger is broken, you've got a migraine, whatever. And an amateur will fold. An amateur will say, I can't do it, I'm all screwed, But a pro, Michael Jordan would never even dream of folding, right? Yeah. He would, have a broken leg with a bone would be coming out of his flesh and he'd still be playing. So that's that kind of an attitude, really a serious professional attitude. Turning pro. The other thing about turning pro is you can do it just by flipping a switch in your mind. It doesn't cost any money. You don't have to take a course. You just decide, I'm not an amateur anymore, and I'm not going to do this as an amateur. I'm a pro. And then it's a process of reinforcing that every day and telling yourself, whether you have to use affirmations, look in the mirror, whatever, I'm a pro. I'm not an amateur. I'm not going to fold. I'm not going to cave. No matter how I feel, I'm going to do my work.
Yeah, that's so great. And you alluded to this. I'm pretty sure it's your book. It's always stuck with me.
If it isn't, I'll take credit for it.
Well, I think you talk about it's I think it's Somerset Magnum or something like that.
Somerset Maugham, yeah.
Gets asked, do you write when you're inspired, or do you write every day on a schedule? And it's like, oh, well, of course, it's only when I'm inspired. But fortunate for me, that's at 9 a.m. every single morning. Yeah. Right. And so just that concept of being a pro, and pros have a schedule, they show up, they do the work, whether they feel like it or not. That's so great.
Exactly.
Hey, so we talked on resistance specific to writing, and I polled some of our audience before this interview and said, hey, what are some questions you want me to ask? And one of them I thought was really interesting. It was resistance specific to publishing. So and she was like, oh, I have this resistance, I work through it. I write the book. It's all good. But then for me, the resistance hits right before I publish it. And so any thoughts on that? Have you been through that? And any thoughts for folks on how to work through that?
Do you mean like self-publishing?
Yeah. It could be self-publishing or traditional publishing, but like that actual crossing over from the manuscript's done to I am putting this out in the world.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it's absolutely true. That is a huge point of resistance. There are kind of predictable points in any project. I don't care what it is: building a city, starting your own restaurant, that are resistance points. And one of them is before you even begin. resistance will be very strong, trying to get you to not even start. Right? You can't do it. Forget it. Then you usually plunge in, and to your amazement, you're actually working. And then you're real enthusiastic. You get, maybe the first act of something done. And then all of a sudden you sort of wake up. You're sort of like somebody that was water skiing for the first time, and they're actually up and skiing. And then suddenly you look down, oh my God, I'm actually up, and then you panic. And then that's when resistance hits again. Then in the middle, resistance will hit because you're too far from the beginning to be psyched up by that. And you're too far from the end that's a big point in the middle. Then right before the end, just when you're on the 1 yard line, that was for me the big resistance point for me. I would fold, and 99% of the way through. But then you're absolutely right. At the moment when you're ready to publish is another huge, huge resistance point. Like, who Seth Godin is, right?
Mm-hmm.
He has a thing called shipping. And what he means by that is like, if you're Steve Jobs and you just invented the iPhone and it's ready to go, it's like, when do you push the button and say, ship it, get it out there and of course, that's a really scary moment because then you can be judged, right? The thing can fail as long as you got it still in the box and you haven't shipped it. So Seth has a whole big thing about psyching people up to ship. And so, yes, it is a huge resistance point, and you just have to suck it up and do it,
That's awesome. Well, hey, a couple final questions I have for you. One would be, and so I was interviewing John C. Maxwell last week, and I asked him this same question. And I'm curious to get your take. So you're in your 70s. How do you keep the passion to keep doing this as you get older? And any advice for others who they're probably in one of two buckets. Either they're thinking like, you said, hey, I didn't publish my first work till 54. So maybe they're even in their 50s thinking, hey, I've already missed it. Or they're in their 50s, 60s, 70s trying to find that fire. How do you do it?
Maybe it was for me that it took me so long to get started or to get any bit of success that I sort of feel like I'm still behind the 8 ball. I'm way, I still haven't completed anything, but also I don't have any problem with that. I still have ideas. I'm still enthusiastic. I still have things I want to do. I'm like, people talk about burnout, and I think that you burn out if you're in an endeavor that's really not your passion. If it is your passion, I don't think you ever burn out. I mean, the Rolling Stones are still performing, we just lost one of their guys, but the Stones are still out there performing at whatever they are, 79 years old. That's whatever Mick Jagger is. I don't have any problem with that at all. I wish I could do more.
Yeah. Wow. This is a big question, but I'm just super curious. I don't know if we'll have time to get into it. But I know we get asked about this all the time. We have kind of our nonfiction division of the company, children's book side of the company, and our fiction side of the company. And it's every fiction author's dream to get their book turned into a movie. So obviously, you had the screenplay background. Any tips for folks on how to take that leap from book to movie?
A lot of it is tips. If I had any tips, I'd have more movies. But, I will say one thing. Writing a novel is a great way to get a movie made rather than trying to write a screenplay. Because particularly in today's environment, when I first came out to Hollywood in the mid 80s and the early 90s, it was a different world. And what they call spec scripts written on speculation, without a buyer, could actually get made. And studios were looking for them and actors were looking for them. But that's not the case anymore. Now that there are so many, other than in the independent film world, now there's so many sequels and so many Marvel Comics thing. And those go only to like big established writers that the studios know can deliver, So, but to write a book and then hopefully the book gets picked up by someone, that is a good way to get to get a story made. Right now is a bad time because of COVID.
Yeah.
That pre-COVID, when the studios got scared and they began stockpiling material. Mm-hmm. So they now are sitting on, a bunch of scripts and they're not looking for anything new.
Yeah.
But a lot of it is just luck. There's just no, if you have a good agent and can get something out, but a lot of it is just luck. Finding
right people,
somebody finds you, and that's about the only way you can do it. I haven't figured out how to get it done. I keep watching stuff that's being made, and I say, why are they making that instead of my stuff? My stuff's much better than that. So,
oh man,
it's hard. It's a real long shot.
Yeah, that's well, Steven, this has been so great. What would be your parting piece of advice for for the Steven Pressfield of a bajillion books ago? So before you even wrote your first book, and all the other Steven Pressfields out there that are sitting there contemplating writing their first book, what would be your advice for those folks, knowing what you know now?
Okay, I will put out some advice. If you wanted to be a concert pianist or a brain surgeon, you would know in your mind, I got to put in 12 years of back-breaking work, right? I got to be absolutely committed. But people seem to think, just like I did, I could write a novel, no problem. It's hard work. Why would writing a novel be easier than brain surgery? It's not. At least brain surgery you can go to school for, right? You can actually get a degree and now you're a brain surgeon. So I would say, but the good news is you can get better. You can start out as a kind of a bum, like I did, and little by little, you can get better. You can learn. You can make mistakes and learn from it. And I've sort of just from observing other people and myself trying to pursue a career, I figure like if you can hang in, this is in any creative field, like for music, to be a band, to be a songwriter, to be whatever, or movies or books, if you can hang in for 10 years and pay your dues, meet people, learn your craft, most people, I think, after 10 years, will find a way. Maybe you're not going to write Gone with the Wind, but you can find a career in the field one way or another. Might not be the career you started out wanting to do, but it could be something. So, but it ain't easy. And if you think it's easy, you're just kidding yourself. It's easy for some people. Bob Dylan did it, Neil Young did it. But for most people, you got to pay your dues.
Yeah, that's good. I had a mentor one time. He said, Chandler, it takes 10 years to become an overnight success.
Yeah.
It's kind of like you said. It's
true. Absolutely.
Overnight success. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it was 30 years. So be of good cheer.
Oh man. Well, this has been so great. Where can people go to find out, to find your books, to buy your books, to find out more about you and what you're up to?
I have a website, stevenpressfield.com. I'm on Instagram, Steven_Pressfield, Amazon, any of those places have all my stuff. Just Google me and you'll find, plenty of stuff.
Awesome. Well, guys, check out his books. And especially, I mentioned this at the top, but just The War of Art had such a huge impact on me and is just so helpful along my journey. So if you're going to start with one, that's a good one to start with. At least that's a personal recommendation from you. Steven Pressfield, thank you, sir.
Chandler Bolt, thank you for having me. And if you ever want to do this again, I'm happy to do it again.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.